On va tout de suite commencer, puis les autres participants nous retrouveront en chemin. Donc,
So we will be
merci à
starting a
toutes et tous
kicking
d'être
off the
avec nous
meeting.
ce
Thank you
matin
very much for being with
pour
us this
cette première
morning.
session
For this
numérique. Je
first
remercie tout
digital
d'abord Myriam
and online
et
session, I'd like
Rita
to
qui sont
extend
avec
my
nous et
heartfelt
qui sont
thanks
nos
to Miriam
interprètes
and
pour
Rita,
la session.
and they will be
Donc, on
our
les remercie
interpreters for this
beaucoup et on va
session.
essayer
We
de
want to
faciliter
thank
leur
them
travail.
very much, and we want
Si
to make their
possible,
life
vous
easy and their
envoyez
work easier.
les consignes
And
audio, donc en
please
utilisant des casques filaires
use
avec le micro
headsets with
et coupons les
microphones
micros pour avoir le moins d'interférences
and to
possible.
have the less
Merci beaucoup.
interferences as possible.
C'est un plaisir de vous retrouver
It
pour
is a
cette
real
première session
pleasure
numérique,
to
une
see
session
you all
interactive
online
qui est
for
prévue.
this
Donc c'est un
remote
plaisir, c'est la
session.
première fois
It
qu'on a
is
des sessions
interpreted,
introduites
and it
dans
is
cette
the
édition
actual
numérique
this
des
first
rencontres européennes de la
time we're having
participation.
interpreted
Donc j'introduis rapidement pour ceux
sessions
qui ne
in
connaissent
these
pas les
European
rencontres. On était tous
meetings
d'abord
of
pendant 3 jours
participation.
à
So
Strasbourg
for
pour
three
partager des idées
days,
différentes.
for those who do
Ça
not
a été un
were not
super moment
familiar
d'échange
with this,
et
we were for 3 days. I'm
est-ce que vous
sorry,
pouvez...
people, could you
Oui,
please switch off your
voilà,
microphones?
c'est fait. Donc c'est un super moment d'échange et donc
This
on
is a
poursuit
great
maintenant en numérique
moment
avec
of
différents ateliers.
exchange to
Aujourd'hui sur la
have several
question
online
des valeurs.
workshops on
Donc on a
values.
Goda et
We
Anne-Charlotte
have
qui sont avec
Goda
nous
and
aujourd'hui et qui vont présenter
Charlotte who
cet
are with
atelier.
us
Je les en
today. They will be
remercie.
making a
Et
presentation,
donc merci
a
à vous.
brief
Et s'il y a
presentation
d'autres
of this
sessions qui
workshop. Well,
continuent
thank you
jusqu'au
very much
vendredi
for being
après-midi, on
here.
en a une cet
And
après-midi, une demain
we
matin et
also have
vendredi.
another
Si vous souhaitez
session
vous
in
inscrire,
the
c'est toujours
afternoon
possible.
today and
On a pareil,
tomorrow. If you
chaque
still want to
session, on a
register
des ateliers
and
qui sont
log in,
pris en traduction. On a aussi
it's
des ateliers
still
en
possible. We
seulement
have
anglais.
workshops
Voilà.
in
Donc, je
English
vais tout de
or
suite laisser
other
la
workshops in
parole
French and
euh,
English that are interpreted.
à Goda et
I will now
Anne-Charlotte
give the floor to Goda
pour
and
l'atelier. Je vous
Anne-Charlotte
remercie
for
et
to kick
je
off the
vous
workshop
retrouve à la fin de
introduction
l'atelier. J'espère
words.
que
And
ce
I
sera un
really
super
look
moment.
forward
Merci
to
beaucoup.
working with you. And this is going to be,
Thank
I'm
you very much.
sure, a great moment. Thank you.
I will share my screen. Gabrielle, could you let me know whether it's visible for? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today. It's really pleasant to see that many people have interest in this topic, and also a big pleasure to join this event. This is the first time for me at this conference. So great that there is an opportunity to be more inclusive and to include different countries and different languages. This is really great because I think public participation is interdisciplinary, international, intercultural inquiry. So it's nice that we can address these questions together. My name is Goda. I'm a professor in environmental psychology at the University of Groningen. For those who do not know, it's a city in the very, very north of the Netherlands, sort of comparable to Strasbourg, a little bit smaller, but also very psychable. It's a student city, it's a university city. So I recommend to everyone who has not been there to come and visit. I'm very happy Anne-Charlotte will join us today so that we can provide a dual perspective. The plan is that I will walk you through the research that I've been doing and my team has been doing into public participation and values. And afterwards, Anne-Charlotte will provide her reflection on the topic from her experience and expertise. And there will also be a room for you to give your ideas. So perhaps the first question, what am I doing here? A professor in environmental psychology, not sure whether you know what it is, very briefly. In environmental psychology, we look at the relationship between people and their environment. And in Groningen in particular, we look at sustainability issues. So what motivates people to think about climate change, to act to reduce climate change, why some people care about the environment, others don't, and what motivates people to be more engaged with climate policy. So what the hell am I doing here talking about public participation? The reason is that we have sort of a problem. If we talk about climate policies, we most agree that climate policies are needed. I mean, the recent report of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change says that we have to do something and quickly to keep global warming under 2 degrees, ideally under 1.5 degrees. And for that, we need nation, Europe, worldwide policies, and we have to get the politicians and the public on board. However, today I'm talking France and the Netherlands. I could talk about other countries as well, because across Europe and across many countries and continents, we see that people are not always happy with climate policies. And these are just a couple of examples. I mean, the yellow vest is a very recognizable example. What happened in France, it was actually it was actually sparked by a policy that you could call a climate policy. I mean, and the idea was to increase taxes on fossil fuels. But that resulted in increased prices in gasoline. And that then resulted in some people feeling really treated badly by that policy, because especially people in urban areas, they were not anymore able to access location or to commute in a way that they used to. And this sparked a lot of resistance, which of course later turned into a wider nationwide protest. But this is, although very well known, this is just one example. In the Netherlands and other European countries, we've recently had farmers' protests against nitrogen reduction. So these are just a few examples, but if you look across the board, people are not always feeling represented, or they do not feel very supportive of climate policies. And you may wonder what the reason is. And some could say, well, these people just don't care about climate change. They just don't know what a big problem we have. And we should just educate them, and we should just tell them that those policies are very much needed. But is it really? Is it that people do not know enough? Is that the problem? Well, if we look at the data from European Social Survey that has studied most countries in Europe, well, we see that people are not ignorant. So here in white and very light blue, you can see the percentages across countries of citizens who are either not at all worried or not worried about climate change. And you can see clearly that white and light blue are very small fractions of the entire picture. What you see more is that people are either somewhat worried or very worried or extremely worried. And I just underlined, circled France and the Netherlands. And we see that in France, over 80% of citizens are worried about climate change. And we see in the Netherlands a very similar picture. Almost 80% of the population are worried about climate change. And it becomes even more, even clearer when we look at young people in Europe. So these are the results of the European Youth Barometer last year, which shows that if you ask young people, what are the key priorities for Europe in the next year? We see that in France and the Netherlands, climate is the second priority for youth. It follows after rising prices and cost of living. In both countries, in France and in the Netherlands, we see that the percentage of youth who put climate as their top priority is even higher than the European average. And only afterwards follow things like economic situation, social protection, education and training. So for young people, the environment and climate change is a higher priority than education and training. And this speaks for itself and answers our first question, that ignorance is not a problem, or there is no ignorance among citizens. The reason why people are against climate policies is not because they don't know that we are in trouble, which also has political implications, meaning that if we want to get people on board, we will not achieve that by educating people about climate change. We need something else. we need to actually think about what those climate policies mean for people, because it's one thing to be aware of climate change. Another thing is to be willing to make the sacrifices that are required by combating climate change. And the fact here is that we will all be affected by climate policy. So climate policies are very interesting because they come very, very close to us. And if you think about the daily living, we will be in all domains, in all areas, we will be affected. Mobility, we just talked about the yellow vest, right? We might observe increases in fuel prices. We might observe bans on gasoline vehicles, which is already happening in France, in Strasbourg in particular. So mobility will have to change. Our food habits will have to change. Again, we were talking about farmers' protests. Well, if we are affecting farmers, that will affect our food supply. So climate policies will have influence on what products we have in the supermarkets and for which prices. Meat consumption is a very controversial example in climate policies. We've just done a European survey where we asked people what they think about different types of climate policies in different domains. And one of the examples that we provided, we said, well, imagine your meat products or beef would raise in price by 50%. That was the most controversial policy that we found in our study. So these things can affect people, and people might feel strongly about it. Consumption, climate policies might mean that we may not be able to consume as much as we are used to. For example, clothing. We might switch perhaps to secondhand clothing. Maybe the clothing prices would increase. That affects us immediately again. And our homes, of course. Energy prices increasing. Again, in both countries, the Netherlands and in France, it has not been long ago that we had energy prices and people had so immediate increases in energy prices. And that can happen more with more climate policy. So we will be affected. And that's why I propose here, and I invite you to think long. How do we deal with this in climate policies? Which basically means that if we are thinking about responsible climate policies, it will not be enough to just build those policies based on facts. So we know from climate scientists what the situation is. We know how much CO2 emissions we have to reduce. We have technical solutions to achieve those CO2 emissions, but that is not enough, I propose, for responsible climate policies. What we also have to think about is people's values. Because climate policies will mean trade-offs for the things that we value. It might imply trade-offs, for example, between freedom and autonomy and environmental values. So we might not be able to do things that we are used to do. We might have to be able to pay extra. We might feel that we are not owners of our own homes anymore because we have all these sustainable technologies and we have to save energy, etc., etc. And the question is, what do people think about it, and what values do they actually find important, and what trade-offs are they wanting to make or not? Just a very brief definition so that we are all on the same page of what values are. So when I talk about values today, I mean the very, very general goals and ideals in life that people strive for. So these are really abstract concepts. They are not very, it's not about a concrete technology. It's not about a concrete solution. These are very, very general things. Like I mentioned, freedom, but you can think also about solidarity, environment, etc., etc. This means that values are general. They are not situation specific. Across different situations, we may have the same values that we strive for. And a lot of research has shown that values guide our cognitions, our emotions, and our actions. So to put it maybe a bit more simple, you could see values as sort of glasses that we see, through which we see the world. So when we are looking at our world, when we are feeling certain emotions, and when we are planning our actions, we assess those situations from the value perspectives that we have. So we think about what is important to us, and that guides how we feel, how we think, and how we act. So now I would be very curious to learn a little bit more about you. And I will do so by asking you to think a little bit now for yourself. What are your important values? Just think about it a little bit, and soon we will have a word cloud to put them in. You can use the QR code or the link with the event code to share your values. I put this word cloud purposely so that we don't have to share those values with our names, etc. So feel free to write 1 or 2 or 3 values that you find really important. Mm. Thank you. Thank you so much. We see a whole spectrum of different values. Solidarity and respect, responsibility, doing things together, fairness, culture. Thank you very much for sharing. We asked a slightly different question in the European survey. I will go back to that soon. But first, let's just look at these values and think a bit about the things that you wrote yourself. And I would like to ask you a little bit of a different question. So think about climate policies in your country. It can be France, it can be any country that you come from or that you feel as your home. To what extent do you feel that those values are considered in climate policy making in your country? Thanks, Gabrielle. Thank you very much, Gabriel. Can everyone see the results?
Est-ce que tout le monde peut bien me confirmer que vous voyez les résultats?
Oui. No.
Can everyone confirm that you see the results,
thanks.
please?
Thanks. So I see mostly very little or some. So people are a bit in the middle. We don't see anyone who thinks that climate policies are doing already an excellent job in taking people's values into account. Some think that it's going quite well, but I see more, some, or very little, or not at all. Thanks. We'll come back to that. All right, so we asked a slightly different question to European citizens in different countries. We actually asked them about how much they themselves feel that they can participate in climate policies with the values that they find important, how much they think that they are actually included in climate policy making in their country. And these are the results that I would like to share with you today. Please note that this is yet unpublished data, so it's just for you today, not yet for sharing. We asked people first how much they would like to be involved in climate policy making, and this is the graph that you see on top, right, where you see more blue color, and we have France and the Netherlands again circled, and we have other countries. So if we ask people how much would you like to participate as citizen in climate policy making in your country, we see that people want to participate a lot or a great deal or to some extent. So you see some yellow, you see some blue, right? So people are ready to be involved, to think a lot, to think about climate policies and to perhaps bring in their values. However, we see a quite different picture below when we ask them, how much do you actually think that the climate policy making in your country allows you to participate? So to what extent do you feel involved? And here we see much more red than blue. And this is what we call public participation deficit. And we see it in France, we see it in the Netherlands, we see it to some extent more in other countries like Czech Republic and Slovenia. We see this deficit a little bit less in some countries like Denmark and Sweden. But across Europe, we see that people do want to be involved and to be listened to and heard in climate policy making, but they don't think it's happening enough. And this is somewhat similar to what you also just said, that when it comes to our values, we sort of feel that those values are perhaps not yet enough represented in climate policies in our countries. Okay, so I used half an hour to sort of show that we have some kind of a problem with values and public acceptability and public participation. Now let's move to what can we do about that, and perhaps also why am I here, and how can we use public participation to reach climate policies that are more in line with people's values. Well, for that, it helps if we have some kind of a framework, some kind of an overview of the values that people in Europe, but also around the world, find important. And these are the 4 value types that has been researched a lot since a long time in environmental psychology and beyond. These are the 4 values that are particularly important when we talk about sustainability and climate policies. Let me go through these 4 types. The 2 values above are altruistic and biospheric values. Altruistic values refer to everything that they're also called self-transcendent values. So it's not about ourselves, it's not our personal interest, it's about others. So altruistic values refer to caring about society, caring about other people. Some of you also have mentioned children. It could be future generations. These are all altruistic values. Biospheric values are somewhat similar in a sense that it's not about ourselves, but it's about nature and the environment. And I saw that also coming back in the word cloud. So some of you have mentioned nature, biosphere, planet, etc., etc. Biospheric values are all about caring about nature and the environment. The two values below, egoistic and hedonic, they're more about ourselves. So egoistic values are about personal resources, and it can be money, but it can also be other things that also I saw coming back in the word cloud, such as autonomy and freedom. These are also personal egoistic values, and perhaps the name sounds sometimes a bit negative, but these are the things that we all find important. And our personal resources, such as money, to some extent, also most of people find important. And at the end, we have hedonic values, and this is pleasure and comfort. This is also about ourselves. This means that we want to live pleasurable, nice life. We want to have good time with our friends, with our family. We want to enjoy life. We want to have a good quality of life. And this is what is referred to hedonic values. So together, these four value types, they cover the main needs and motivations that people have when it comes to sustainability and climate policies. And when I give this presentation or when I talk about values to different audiences, sometimes I get a question like, can you tell us, Goda, how many altruists or how many hedonists are there in France or in the Netherlands or in a specific region or in Groningen? And this is not a good question because that's not how the value theory works. So it's not that we have people who only care about environment or only care about money. These are values that are important to most of us. It might be that we prioritize them somewhat differently, but in general, we all have these values quite strong. There are some individual differences in who finds what more important. But the interesting thing is that these values can make us think differently about climate policies. And also, these values can introduce conflicts in value policies. So what we see is from many studies that we did in surveys and interviews, etc., we see that climate policies are usually sort of in line with our altruistic and biospheric values, right? So if we talk about children, about future generations, about planet, etc., well, then we usually think, well, those climate policies are needed and they're pretty good. But at the same time, those climate policies can have negative consequences for our egoistic and hedonic values. So let's take our diets again. Well, maybe in general, we really care about the environment, but when it comes to, giving up meat completely, for some people, it might be really a threat to their egoistic and hedonic values. And that's where conflicts start occurring. And that's why my proposition today is that perhaps if we want to invite people more to participate in climate policy making, we have to talk more about these values. Can we bring those four different values more into the forefront in public participation? And I would like to discuss two examples. So I will maybe I should say I don't really have the way to talk about values. I think it can be done in many different ways. It's more to open the conversation and to hear your ideas. How can we deal with those values in public participation, and do they already come across enough in public participation? And I could have chosen between different types of participation forms, but I chose climate assemblies for two reasons. I think it's an interesting development in both countries, in the Netherlands and France. I mean, in France, again, the very known example, Citizen Climate Convention from 5 years ago. In the Netherlands, we had Energy Citizen Assembly in 2023. And actually, at this very moment, we are having a National Climate Citizen Assembly in the Netherlands, which is a very similar format to the French Citizen Assembly from 5 years ago. I suppose most of you know what climate assemblies are. This is a representative group of citizens who are drawn by lottery to convene several days or in several sessions to discuss sustainability issues and climate issues. And afterwards, they come up with recommendations for policymakers, in a nutshell. And the other reason why I chose climate assemblies, because perhaps it might offer an interesting venue to talk about values, because a specific feature of citizen assemblies is that there is deliberation and there is facilitated deliberation. So people are encouraged to think about issues from different perspectives, and there's a lot of room for input, and there's a lot of room for conversation. And I thought perhaps that could be an interesting venue to bring in those values and to try to think about different values in climate policymaking. Let's go just briefly through the French example. So perhaps most of you remember, but just to recap, the task for citizens was to propose measures to reduce France's greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030 in the spirit of social justice. So social justice already sort of refers to one value, if you like. There were a lot of experts. There was a legal team supporting citizens, and 149 recommendations came out of it. I'm sure you know it was praised and it was criticized. It was criticized for the fact that not all recommendations were taken up. I will not go too much into that, but what stood out for me was that yes, perhaps perhaps recommendations were not taken up, but what I find more interesting is that the underlying values were also not taken up. So I can imagine that certain recommendations or certain solutions perhaps sometimes cannot be taken up, or perhaps they could. But what I would find even more interesting, can we think about what were the underlying values and can we do something with those? So a very concrete example, one of the recommendations was to reduce speed limit on highways. And it was quite controversial and it was rejected. But that's where the discussion ended. And I was just curious, what if we go deeper into the values that were underlying this recommendation? Because what citizens were basically telling us is that we are willing to give up some of our freedom and some of our autonomy and some of our habits to reduce the pollution and to reduce CO2 emissions. And I'm just very curious, if we work not necessarily with a concrete solution, but if we look at the underlying values, can we come together to the solutions that could actually work? It's a question. I don't have an answer. The Dutch Citizen Assembly, we tried a slightly different approach there. So we did not ask for very concrete solutions. We asked people to think about their values. So as you see, the question was also a little bit different. We didn't ask them, well, you have to reduce the emissions by 40% or 50% or whatever. We asked them more open questions. What are the preconditions? What are the key things that are for you important when we talk about sustainable energy system? We also didn't have so many experts because we wanted people to talk more about their values rather than getting very much information. So there were actually just 6 presentations from experts, and the citizen assembly members could choose the experts themselves. They could choose themselves whom they want to hear. And that resulted in a substantially fewer recommendations that are that were much more generic. So they were not very concrete, but they were more bringing up the things that should be considered in policy making. And I would like to share just some examples here of the things that people were coming up with. Oh, perhaps this is just something to mention. We were asking people to talk about those different values, but when the organization of the Citizen Assembly heard about the names that the value names that I was proposing, so biospheric, altruistic, egoistic, hedonics, they hated it. They said, Goda, you cannot ask people to talk about their egoistic values. Nobody will admit that they have any. So we changed the names. Altruistic values became solidarity values. We called the biospheric, the green values. We called egoistic values, the self values, and hedonic values, the pleasure values. The idea is the same. We still capture those 4 quadrants, if you like. And these are the things that I just wanted to show what people were talking about. And after this, I will give the word to Anne-Charlotte. These were the things that people mentioned, just like you mentioned in the word cloud. But here we categorize them a little bit, and we use them as a starter for discussion and for the conversation. If you look at solidarity values, what was striking to me was that people really wanted to engage in climate policies together. So they said it's much more effective and it's much nicer if we can do things together. So we want to share responsibility. We want to be able to find each other. Together, we are just stronger. And for instance, they really were interested in energy cooperatives, energy communities, because there was a very strong driver to not engage in climate and energy policies alone, but with other people and with other communities. For green values, of course, they mentioned the environment and landscape and nature preservation, but there were also some other concerns coming up, like greenwashing. So they said that the government should also be much stricter with companies and industry who plead that they are green, but who are not always trusted by citizens to be green, and whether we should not be more attentive to that or more controlling of that. For self-values, if you look below, so you see, it's not just about money. People, of course, said that climate policies and future energy systems should be affordable to many people or to all of us. But they also mentioned things, what you also mentioned in the word cloud, autonomy, independence, and ownership. And very concretely, actually, there was a long discussion about the homeowners, because citizens in the assembly found it really unacceptable that people who rent their homes are not able to decide about energy measures in those homes. So they said, well, home renters should also be able to decide whether there will be solar panels on the roof, because that's their autonomy and that's their freedom and independence. And finally, pleasure values. I found this probably perhaps the most interesting. Not too big of a hassle. So people said, you know, if you want to insulate your home, or if you want to go for any other energy measure in your house or in your car or whatsoever, it's so difficult to do that. There are so many rules and regulations and organizations who are supposed to help you out, but people are lost in bureaucracy. And they said, just make it simple. Just help people. Just tell them exactly what they have and what they can to do. And the other thing that came quite interestingly here with pleasure values was that climate policies should be made more fun and nice. So they said, whenever we talk about climate, it's always so somber, that we are always blamed that we still eat too much meat, that we still take too many flights. But there are also many things that people already do. There are many people who choose a vegetarian diet, a vegan diet. There are many people who cycle, etc., etc. And they said, well, show also those nice examples and make climate policies be a bit more enthusiastic, make them a bit more engaging, because that speaks to our hedonic values, and that can really get the public on board. So these are the few things that I wanted to share from the direct experiences in public participation, but also the broader framework on values and its possible role in public participation on climate policies. And I would like to stop here because I've been taking way too much time. I'm very curious about the perspective of Anne-Charlotte, and then depending on the time, we'll see what would be the most effective way to get your perspective from the audience.
Merci beaucoup, Goda, pour cette intervention très inspirante.
Thank you, Goda, for this very inspiring presentation. My name is Anne-Charlotte Antony. I'm a PhD. I'm a PhD on democracy, on a topic with democracy with Goda. I think it would be very interesting to have a perspective on both sides. So for France and the Netherlands on this topic, and so maybe I will piggyback on that. This theory that is suggested by Goda raises an essential question that is raised very often in France, which is how to ensure that a more engaging public participation that's also more impactful. I mean, there were several experiments that have been done to see how we could increase mobilization. It's true that where there are few people that attend, or the same people that attend, which is a study was published in 2021 by several researchers, where the question is, do French citizens want more democracy? This study revealed that the answer is more nuanced. Where there's a lot harder to take part in these approaches. Why take time? I mean, this is a question of personal values, or whether if people believe, or if citizens believe, that there isn't enough impact. So there's a certain idea that we cannot go beyond representative democracy and decision-making by elected officials, or however, the study revealed that, or the survey revealed that when citizens share their views or share concerns, they expect a consideration of these concerns that were expressed, and so which raises another challenge, and maybe other values, other underlying values of a greater consideration of citizens' expectations. There's another point on values, is to step out from a purely procedural logic, and the idea is to see whether there's the diversity of the people around the table, but to try to see how the values, or what will truly motivate the participants, will to be able to express themselves. And in France, it seems that we have much too much of a procedural, too technical approach, which removes the political layer of the debate. I find a question on the chat. So there are several authors that have published this survey. I will share their names in the chat.
Donc oui, en fait, finalement, le fait de toujours regarder est-ce que le dispositif est bien conçu, la démarche est bien
checking
conçue,
whether the approach is well structured, and whether we have set up resources to ensure diversity and participation. A researcher also has spoken to depoliticization because we will focus on the values and on technical issues that are very difficult to grasp by citizens. And that in fact they don't feel at ease with these questions. There's also another challenge or another there's also another challenge with going with these values is to make these decisions more acceptable because they would have been discussed and negotiated by the city dwellers, for instance, or the citizens directly. So there, on the one hand, the acceptance by the citizens is one thing, and also the political support on the other. It's true that sometimes there are interesting. I mean, it doesn't mean that that the structure or the format or the interest of these or the validity of these suggestions or formulations or formulated recommendations would mean that they would be actually taken into consideration by the political leaders. There's also the value-based approach, which is present in this participative evaluation, where we're trying to involve citizens, elected officials, public agents, experts, to discuss a given public policy. And so the evaluation is to basically to pass judgment on a policy. So, which necessarily speaks to passing a judgment on the relevance of this policy and reveals our perspective or the way we see life. A researcher, a Spanish researcher, has tried to see how which model could be used to. It is indeed a technical, which is indeed a technical approach, but which this study was consisted in 3 steps. The first step allowed citizens to express their positions, their values, and sometimes these values aren't necessarily obvious. I mean, maybe this exercise is interesting, and this isn't necessarily something that is expressed regularly, or at least not consciously. And so first to express these values, and then analyzing the different values expressed, these power dynamics that can exist, so for the potential conflicts between these values and the idea. And a third step was to identify solutions to address an issue that would integrate these values. And in this way, we have a whole series of solutions that address a value. And so the idea is to see how there can be a trade-off between the values that are expressed, and so to select the right solution based on the expressed values. I believe that what Goda is suggesting is to express the values in order to have a clear conversation on what we are comfortable with and what solution we can implement that could be accepted as broadly as possible by citizens, and possibly.
Oui, bien sûr. Si vous voulez, à la fin de la discussion, j'enverrai une référence.
Yes, I'd be happy to send a reference and so an article that detailed the steps. But yes, I'd be happy to share that.
J'aimerais aussi, pardon, je vous ai dit que j'étais chercheuse embarquée dans une association qui s'appelle Démocratie.
So I mentioned that I was a researcher.
Je voudrais vous parler de 2 expérimentations.
I would like to share 2 experiments
sont un peu à la frontière de ces questions
that are on the frontiers of this conversation around borders. The Démocratie, which is a tool to measure democracy, and which is available online. You can simply type demometer.org and you can access the survey. And this tool aims to collect data, two types of data: objective data, factual data, whether these minutes of whether the minutes of these public meetings are publicly shared, and more subjective perception-based data or questions, how citizens feel in their territory, and whether there is a match between what is set up by the local authority and the expectations of citizens. So the introductory question to this survey is on what political regime would you like to live on? So before evaluating the quality of democracy on the territory, we need to understand first what is the democratic system that they're a part of, which will allow them to see the results or view the results from another perspective, which helps us to understand whether they do subscribe to this participative democracy or not. And as part of the assessment, one participant had said, well, I answered that my ideal model was a representative democracy, but it is also participative, where questions are regularly asked to citizens for political decision making. But over the conversation with other participants, what she ended up expressing wasn't as much the need that she had to participate actively and to be heard, but rather accountability for the elected officials to be able to justify the decisions that they had made, on which basis these decisions were made, and if they didn't take into consideration the recommendations of the citizens, why. So there's more of a need to understand why than necessarily have these citizens have their decisions taken.
Me fait penser dans l'exposé de Goda au démomètre, c'est que le démomètre, les habitants répondent au questionnaire.
Demometer. So what's a demometer? Well, the citizens, they reply to the citizens, and the first reaction they might have, I don't have the answer. I don't know, because I never asked the question or wondered about what are my preferences and what are the things I want to have. So be it a participatory approach or citizens consultation that pushes people to question themselves on what is important for them. This is as such a democratic approach, an initiative, and this addresses another rationale. There isn't always or necessarily good or bad choices. Well, maybe for climate policies or beyond that, for democracy as a whole. But we do consider that there are preferences out there. So we need to make sure that those preferences emerge and favor and encourage the implementation of all the decisions that are made. And this is the final outcome and purpose is to have a positive impact on all the decision-making process. So this value theory challenges us on how to actually better achieve a citizens' participation and better serve the citizens, and also make sure that our values evolve. I was thinking about another initiative of open democracy that was carried out by Vraiment Vraiment, Truly agency, Vraiment Vraiment. And this is actually about natural spaces, bringing local citizens. And the idea of it is that participants, you could have citizens, elected members out there, and instead of expressing their opinions or their preferences, we ask them to put their selves in the shoes of a living species, and think like a living species, and just figure out and what are the needs for a living species. So, and this is a way to actually think about how our values could be impacted by the values of other living creatures. And the definition we have today shows how the diversity of disciplines, political disciplines, practical politics, etc. So we have researchers, we have elected members, we have agencies, all those stakeholders that operate in the ground. And we have we're very lucky to have Goda working on psychological, environmental psychology. And this is a way to actually maybe see differently the participatory approach, and maybe challenge our values and also the way in which we make decisions. And maybe participation is not only a way to discuss, or a forum to discuss ideas, but also make sure that collective values emerge and those collective values transform and get better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Very interesting insights. I would like to use the remaining time to open the discussion. And for that, we've prepared two questions that could be a source of inspiration, but does not have to be limited to that. The first question is, to what extent do you think that different values are actually being considered, or perhaps some values are dominant in climate policy making? Perhaps green solidarity, self or pleasure, or perhaps there are other values that you think come forward in climate policy making, or maybe do not come forward enough. And the second question, very broad. Do you think that public participation can help us to reach a better alignment between climate policies and the values that people have, also reaching more acceptability for climate policies? And do you perhaps have specific ideas, experiences, how that could be done? But these are just two questions for inspiration. And I would just say, raise your hand, or I don't know how it works. Gabrielle, what is the best way for people to express opinions? Also questions if you have.
Alors, ce qu'on va faire, c'est que si vous avez des questions, n'hésitez pas à lever la main.
No, well,
Et
we
on
have.
laissera la
If you have
parole
questions,
dans
please feel
l'ordre des
free to
personnes
raise
qui
your
lèvent la main, ou
hands
alors
and
dans
ask
le
for the
chat, vous pouvez
floor
mettre votre
and
question
express
et
yourselves, or
je
you
la
can
relèverai à
write
l'oral,
your
ou Goda ou
questions
Anne-Charlotte y
on the
répondront
chat,
directement.
and
Je
Goda or
vous invite aussi,
Charlotte
si vous
can
voulez prendre la
provide you with
parole ensemble,
answers.
à
Also,
utiliser un casque,
if you
de
want
préférence
to
avec un
ask
micro, un
questions,
casque filaire. C'est pour que le son soit le plus
please
agréable
use a
possible
microphone
pour
and a headset with
notre
microphone,
interprète
because our
qui
interpreters have a hard
a la
time,
chance de nous aider aujourd'hui dans ce travail
hard time
colossal.
hearing,
Merci.
and we
Je vous
thank
laisse
them
maintenant
for
poser vos
their
questions et
colossal work. Thank you
merci à
very
Goda et
much.
Anne-Charlotte pour leur
Thank
présentation
you very
et
much for to Goda
aborder vos questions
and
et derrière
Charlotte
les
for
titres.
their incredible, amazing presentations. Now back to you for the floor and questions.
Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Est-ce que...
Are there any
Ah, ça
questions?
commence
I
dans le
see
chat.
one popping up. A question on the
On en
chat.
a une dans le chat, Goda, vous voulez y répondre
Godard,
directement
would you
et
like to
Charlotte
answer this
par la suite?
question, and maybe Charlotte
Une question
after
en
you?
anglais.
It's a
Peut-être
question in
vous pouvez
English.
répéter directement la question, comme ça elle sera traduite en français
Maybe
aussi par la même occasion.
you could
Et
read the
puis je
question
laisserai
so
prendre.
we interpreters can interpret it into French.
I will read the question. I'm thinking about, so the question from Natalie. I'm thinking about, can democratic values be part of climate policy making? What do you think? Yeah, thanks for the question, Natalie. I saw quite a few democratic values in the word cloud: fairness, equality, equity, transparency. The thing is, fairness, for instance, is particularly tricky, interesting. We see from research that fairness, what is fair, may be perceived differently for people with different values. So some might think that it's fair that prices in the supermarket go up, and some think it's unfair, or some think it's fair if everyone has to pay extra, and some people think it's very unfair if low-income households have to pay extra. So I think those democratic values are very interesting for posing a question. There were quite a few participatory processes that start with fairness or justice. So what would be fair, or what would be a just climate policy? And that as a starting point for conversation. But I think we have to go deeper into that, to not very quickly assume what is fair and that fairness is equal to everyone, but also talk to people about what is for you fair and why. And I think that's how we can go into underlying values. And maybe one thing that Anne-Charlotte also mentioned, that it can be difficult to talk about values. We're not used to that, right? Values are also quite abstract. I think what we have to do better sometimes in public participation to help people talk about their values. I agree, they are abstract and we are not used to that. But we have to look for ways to be able to talk about it. And one way could be to ask, now, what is fair for you and why? Another promising way is to talk more about emotions. So what does feel fair, and what does feel right, and why do you have a bad or a good feeling about this measure? And that can also be a sort of door opener for the underlying values. Perhaps Anne-Charlotte has anything to add on this.
Oui, je partage.
I fully agree. This question, this issue of emotion, the emotional part of it, and the issue of sensitivity, this feeling that a person could reconnect with nature and putting themselves in nature's shoes, and also reconnect with their emotions and their feelings and their sensitivity. There are techniques that we could use, cognitive kind of techniques that could help people express their emotions and their feelings, and maybe lead them to feel. And this issue of emotion is absolutely central and paramount indeed.
Est-ce qu'on a d'autres questions, soit dans le chat, soit... Vous pouvez aussi lever la main. Moi, j'ai une question.
I have a question, if I may.
On en a une dans le chat, je vous laisse y répondre.
Well,
tout
there's
d'abord, puis je
a
poserai ma question
question
après. Je
on the
regarde
chat.
d'abord pour la fin.
Maybe I'll keep mine for the end. Let's
Je vous laisse la
focus
lire,
on the question
Anne-Charlotte,
on
et
the
puis comme
chat.
ça, elle sera
And
plus facile
Charlotte,
pour
would
vous
you like
directement.
to read it so we can interpret it in English?
C'était sur
I
les
can't see
références.
it. Well,
Voilà,
that was
excusez-moi.
on the answers,
C'est
rather.
bon. Moi, j'en ai une. Je
I
voulais
have a
avoir
question,
votre
if
avis
I
sur
may.
ça.
I
Enfin,
wanted
c'est
to have your
personnel, hein, pas du
view
tout
on this. This is a
en
personal.
représentant le point de vue de Décider ensemble, forcément.
I'm not
Mais est-ce que vous
representing
pensez
the
aussi qu'il peut y
Décider
avoir une
ensemble
contradiction
necessarily. Do you
entre
think
les
there
valeurs
it could be
démocratiques
a contradiction
et
between the
les
democratic
enjeux
values and the
écologiques et
stakes
environnementaux? Est-ce
and
que les deux
environmental challenges
peuvent
and
rentrer
stakes?
en contradiction, notamment
Like to know
avec,
whether
d'un côté,
both can
le besoin
conflict between, on the one hand, the need to act on urgent matters, and on the other hand, processes that could be, well, maybe I cannot dwell on those things and details that democratic processes take more time than others. But I'd like to know whether these two values can be challenged, contradicting, and what are the needs of both of these values? How can we actually align them?
Thanks. I think it's a value dilemma indeed that comes forward, and both are valid. We need to act soon. Actually, we needed to act yesterday. Right? We are already too late. We need to act soon, and public participation processes take a lot of time. That's the argument that you might hear. Something that one of my answers is, if we do not engage the public, we might lose even more time. So if the public feels excluded from decision making, we've seen examples, right, of protest and demonstrations. I started with that. If people feel excluded from climate policy making, we might lose even more time because people are not on board. And that's actually, public resistance is now one of the biggest bottlenecks. So we have a lot of technologies, we have solutions, but getting people on board is difficult. And that's why I don't think that we can easily say we don't have time for public participation, because we might need more time. But I think it is important to think about that dilemma. How do we make sure? How do we institutionalize public participation in a way that it can facilitate rather than hinder climate policies? But my personal opinion is that it can actually help more than hinder, because if we actually get bottom-up support, I think it can go pretty fast.
On a d'autres questions. Je ne sais pas si je fais un retour
We
rapide
have
aussi
other
pour
questions.
l'ensemble des questions pour
I don't know if I
Allez-y,
can
l'ensemble
make
des
a
questions.
feedback. Well, let's take all
La
the
question
questions.
de
The
Laurie et puis la
question
question dans le
of
chat, et puis
Laurie
n'hésitez pas à répondre
and the
à
other
chacune des
question on
réponses.
the chat, and maybe you could provide answers to all of them.
Charlotte, do you want to take the question by Mathieu?
Laurie, je vous laisse la parole.
Je peux? Est-ce que je peux prendre la parole?
Allez-y, posez la question.
Oui,
Yes, of
bonjour.
course. Good morning.
Voilà, je suis Laurie Corchy, je travaille
I'm
dans
Laurie
une association qui
Corchy.
s'appelle
I
ADRE.
work in
Nous,
an
on anime
association
les
called
réseaux
ADRE. We steer a
des
network
collectivités territoriales sur
of
les massifs
territorial and
alpins.
local
Et
collectivities
ça nous
on
intéresse
the
énormément.
Alpine
On
Massif
fait
and
énormément de
Alpine
démocratie
Alp
participative,
Mountains.
des
We
choses
do a
comme ça.
lot
Mais
of
ce qui nous interpelle beaucoup de plus
participatory
en plus, c'est la question du conflit
participation,
que ça peut générer de parler des valeurs, justement, quand on
but
parle de
we
transformation
are
des territoires sur les questions
very much
du changement
challenged
climatique,
about those
notamment en montagne,
values, when we talk
et
about climate
l'adaptation.
change in
Et ces
mountains and
changements climatiques
adaptations
vous
to
posent une
climate
question
change. I was wondering
la question des valeurs va
about the issue
forcément,
of
comme
values. The
l'expliquait
values,
Anne-Charlotte,
as Anne-Charlotte said
générer en tout
before,
cas
will
de
generate
potentiel de
on
conflit et de prise en
a
considération par
series
là,
of
peut-être là,
conflicts and also
des priorités
things and
identiques
priorities that
face à
were
nos
not
valeurs,
identical
face à nos valeurs. Et donc,
uh,
du coup, ça
in
peut
confrontation with our
générer du
values,
conflit,
and this
notamment
could
quand il s'agit
generate and result
non
in
pas de
conflicts,
réfléchir et
uh,
de proposer des
not
solutions, mais
when
de
it
passer à
comes
l'action.
to
Et j'aimerais avoir un
pondering
peu le
and
retour
providing
d'expérience
reflections
quand il
and
s'agit
thinking,
pas simplement de
but
faire des
rather when it
recommandations
comes
dans un
to
cadre
implementation, when
consultatif,
you have to
mais
implement
aussi dans une
things
prise de
in a
décision et un
consultative
passage à
way
l'action.
and a
Comment ne
decision-making
pas
process, when you have to
arriver
act,
à ce que
how can
le
we
conflit
not
puisse être
end in a conflict
un
and make sure
bloqueur
that this
aux
conflict will not
initiatives en termes de
hinder
changement
these
et de transformation
initiatives that are at
sur
the end of
des
the day
décisions importantes à prendre, notamment en matière
meant to
d'adaptation au changement climatique.
transform,
Je sais que c'est pas le
change the
sujet du moment,
mindset and the
mais les valeurs,
implementation. I know
j'imagine,
that this is
rentrent
not the topic,
en
but the
relation
values are
avec
intertwined
nos
with
priorités
our priorities, individual and collective priorities, and this could result in tensions. So how can manage this when you open that emotional box? Because that's what it's about. It's an emotional box. Thank you. I hope I have been clear in my question.
Anne-Charlotte, do you want to
yes, maybe. Thank you very much. I'm thinking, je pense, je vais parler en français, je ne sais pas pourquoi je parle en
I'll
anglais.
speak French. I don't know why was I speaking in English. Okay, thank you very much for this very relevant question. Maybe I can answer the previous one too. I think I was thinking of an initiative that was led by a laboratory on ecological environmental deviation, talking and addressing the issue of water, relationship with water and water resources, management. There was a researcher with a cognitive research that was working on the issue of conflicts of values. And indeed, it can be very difficult because this has to do with our daily life and things that we have been used to doing for years. These things that are anchored in us and printed in our memory forever. So it's hard to break that, historic way of doing things. But maybe it is compelling because I am compelled to change my daily life. So this can generate a very strong emotion. In this experiment, there was an IT section to actually assess the huge volumes of water that were consumed or overconsumed and how to actually manage the water efficiency use. Well, instead, they just decided that people should actually stop, taking their cars or reducing the water consumption, etc. So that emotional part was very important. And these things should be repeated every week for these to become habits. There was the issue of a daily water consumption, the water drain in the toilets, and every time there was the drain push, it was a way to realize and be totally conscious about the water consumption. Sometimes, okay, let's pull or drain the water in the toilets once, not twice. Anyway, the researchers were asking all these questions that sometimes were challenging the values of hygiene, etc. But then the expert was explaining that this was not problematic from the hygiene or health perspective, but it really had a positive result on the water management, on the water resources, sustainability. So maybe we should kind of disclose this global objective and make it more reachable, more understandable to the people. And this experience was very fruitful because it really explained how we can use better water resources in a more efficient way. So values sometimes can be undermined, but they need to be further promoted. Thank you.
Thanks. And perhaps if I may add, sometimes when we start quickly with solutions and when we start with changing the behavior without discussing the underlying values, there might be a lot of resistance because people feel that their values were not considered, that we are pushing something and we think that other things are not important. And that's why it might actually help to first discuss what is at stake. And sometimes to even acknowledge that some things are super annoying or not convenient, or that it is a value conflict, that sometimes opens up people for trade-off, knowing that that you are listened to, right? That your values are also important. And talking about values sometimes might lead people to realize that they actually have more similar values than they thought. We have examples from wind energy projects. So when you have to build those wind turbines or windmills, and some people are very much against. And we often think, oh, they just don't want anything next to their house. They're just selfish. They just don't want to see those things. But sometimes they're very worried about the local nature and the environment, about the local birds, about the local flora and fauna. So it might be that different people both care about biospheric values, but one will think, oh, windmills are very good for the environment because it's clean energy. And the other things, the windmills are very bad because it hurts nature, but it can help to lift it to the higher level to say, well, actually, we are so more similar than different, perhaps. That can also be a a way to have a conversation and to see how those both values can be combined or at least acknowledged.
On avait une autre question dans... je vous laisse. Laurie, vous
So
aviez
there
une
was
autre question?
another question. Laurier, did you have another question?
Ok,
Laurie?
il y a la main qui est toujours levée.
Pardon, j'ai pas enlevé la main et je
Pas de
voulais
souci.
remercier
I'm
juste
sorry,
remercier
I
pour
didn't lift my hand. I just wanted to thank you for
Une autre
these
question dans le chat
amazing
de
answers.
Mathieu, donc qui est en lien avec
There is
des
another
parties de réponses qui ont déjà
question
été
by
apportées
Mathieu that was in
sur
relation with
quelles
some of
sont
the answers that
les
were
différentes
provided
stratégies
before. What are
proposées
the
de
different
fatalisme des
strategies
personnes sur les rencontres
to
collectives ou les débats
break the
participatifs,
fatalism of
ou même de
people
mettre
on
ces
the
instances en priorité dans la vie occupée des gens?
participatory approach, or maybe just bring people to be further attracted?
Je vous laisse commencer, Anne-Charlotte ou Goda,
Anne-Charlotte,
comme...
Goda,
Merci.
Goda,
Vas-y.
thank you.
Je pense que toutes les questions posées sont très pertinentes, je trouve.
I think all the questions are
Celle-ci,
very relevant indeed.
elle vient
This one
effectivement, en fait,
is
finalement, il y a un peu,
very
on a l'injonction
important.
à réduire notre consommation,
So we are
notamment,
urged to
etc. Et puis
reduce
finalement,
our
il y a une autre injonction
consumption,
aussi qui peut être
but there is
l'injonction à
another
participer plus,
instruction to
s'investir dans la vie
participate more,
démocratique, etc.
to
Et
democratic life,
notamment la
etc.
démarche participative, on sait que ça peut être très tard
Participatory
le soir,
approaches, it
ça
could
peut être
be
long,
sometimes
ça
very
peut avoir des
late at
répercussions sur le
night, it
cerveau
can be
avant, sur
lengthy,
l'attention.
and we have the feeling that
De
it's
pas être
totally
compétent, ça peut
useless.
faire un peu peur,
And we
savoir ce qu'on va
have
devoir
the
faire,
feeling that we
c'est
haven't been
bizarre.
competent or
Et,
talented and we don't know how to do
et il y
things.
a l'enjeu de temps
And
qui
there's
est là, a
also the
priori, dans le
time stake,
boulot
the
ou l'école,
time,
etc. Par
energy
exemple,
that we
dormir
invest in this
très
after a
tôt le soir
long day of work,
et
having to
bouger
dedicate,
tous les
you
week-ends.
know,
Ça peut
some
être
time
contraignant
and
et
energy and
c'est
family time
entendable. Et donc, je pense que
to those
encore une fois, pour le
discourses and
réaliser, c'est important de
discussions.
dire que
So it is important to
de
say,
reconnaître en fait cette
like
difficulté-là et de
Goda
l'entendre.
was saying,
Après, il
to
y a
acknowledge
différentes
these
mesures
obstacles
qui
and
sont proposées,
difficulties.
notamment en France, pour
And there are measures in
apporter
France,
des
for
solutions
instance,
à
to
ce
bring
sujet-là,
solutions on
notamment le
these
cadre du
topics,
statut de citoyen
namely
participant
in the
qui
framework of
propose
the status of participating
qui invite
citizen.
le
In
gouvernement
other
à mettre
words,
en place une
inviting
série
and
de mesures
urging
pour faciliter
the
la
government
participation
to
citoyenne,
implement a series
notamment en
of measures
prévoyant
to
un budget
encourage
citoyen, un petit
citizens'
modèle de budget
participation on,
associatif de bénévolat
on
où finalement
well,
l'employeur pourrait
leave
laisser le citoyen
procedures.
participer à une assemblée citoyenne. Donc il y a
Anyway,
des
for
jours
instance, there might
de
be some
congés dédiés à la
days
participation
of
citoyenne,
dedicated
certaines
leave
mesures pour
for
reconnaître
citizens'
qu'ils ont des attestations en fait de participation
participation. If you
citoyenne
are employed, you need some
validables.
time to dedicate
Et
to
puis
this
bien sûr, c'est
participation
donc collectivement
certificates
en
that could be
mettant en place des
organized by the
mesures
employer. So
qui
collectively
permettent
come up with measures
de trouver des horaires qui puissent
to find the right timing, the right schedules and time
correspondre
slots
au quotidien des
to
personnes et puis aussi souvent
really address the needs of the people and
proposer des moments qui
work on
soient pas
participatory
des
approaches.
moments dans
And
une
maybe
salle
propose
sombre, obscure et
some
isolate, mais plutôt un
moments,
environnement
not in
festif
dark
où on va pouvoir
rooms
bénéficier
or isolated
soit d'un
rooms, but
concert
rather
en
in
commun, d'un
maybe
centre un peu
celebration settings, like a concert
récréatif,
setting,
animatoire convivial.
festive
Ça
environments.
peut être donner des goodies aussi
This could be, we could
pour
give
donner envie.
goodies to
Donc,
people
il y a
to just,
des,
attract their enthusiasm. Thank you, Goda. Maybe you want to add some?
Just briefly, what I didn't touch upon today is think about how we communicate about public participation in terms of values. So what I notice often, at least in the Netherlands, that when people are invited to participate, the communication focuses a lot about altruistic and biospheric values, if it's about climate policies. So participate in making our climate better, participate in sustainable transition, etc., etc. Well, consider whether you speak to people with different values, or are you speaking to a very specific group of people? And it can happen that some people already then feel this is not for me. But perhaps we have to say more, well, Strasbourg is stopping fossil fuel cars. Do you want to have a say about it? You know, you could think whether, and this is the exercise that we often do with participation practitioners, just to go through your public communication piece and just mark in different colors which values you are talking about. Is there a balance, or are you talking to some values more than others, which can influence how much people are wanting to join? Thanks. Gabrielle, I think we are running towards the end of our session. Thank you so much for the questions and for joining. This session was an experiment to me myself. As I said, this is the first time I'm at this conference. This is the first time Anne-Charlotte and I are collaborating live, but surely not the last time, I hope. And I'm very happy about how it went. I want to thank Anne-Charlotte for joining. I want to thank everyone for being there. Special thanks to Gabrielle from Décider ensemble from the first day on, helping to make this a smooth endeavor. And special thanks to the interpretation team who made it really smooth and helpful for us to talk about our values and interest in public participation. So thanks all. If you are interested, perhaps I can just put also my email address in the chat. If you have more questions, just let me know. And I wish you a nice afternoon.
Oui, merci. Merci Goda, j'espère que vous m'entendez. J'ai eu un petit problème technique, donc j'avais plus, plus accès à la réunion pendant un petit moment. Merci à toutes et à tous de vous être connectés pour cette présentation qui
Thank
était
you
vraiment
all for
super.
logging on to this very enriching presentation. We have other workshops throughout the day. We have one this afternoon that will be starting at 2:30 p.m. and we have other workshops tomorrow and during the time slots tomorrow morning and tomorrow afternoon. If you'd like to join, please feel free to register on the Décider ensemble website. Thank you all for your participation. You will find all resources on Décider ensemble. Anne-Charlotte mentioned the citizen status. We had a roundtable with Démocratie, Ouverte and ICPC and the rest on the introduction of this citizen participation, how to raise the barriers of this citizen participation, and how we collectively as associations have brainstormed and on how we can raise the status of citizens. I will include the link in the chat if you'd like to access this report from last year's edition. And thank you all once again, and I look forward to seeing you all for future sessions. Thank you.